All right, Dr. Jen, welcome back to the Emotional Balance Sheet podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Paul. How are you?
Good. I feel like there's all this. You're in California, I'm in Michigan, so I'm in one of these classic swing states. So I feel like there's all this pent up energy and anxiety around the election. We're recording this on October 30th, so the election's less than a week away, and I think we're all starting to really feel it. But I know most of us, doesn't matter like what side of the aisle that you're on, we're just sick of the ads.
Yeah, yeah, it's really overwhelming, and I think I'm glad we're talking about how to take care of ourselves today because I think this type of national event it brings up a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, and it can really force us to examine our priorities.
Yeah, so I think that's a good lead into what I think the topic we really wanted to talk about, which is a thread that we pulled on during our last conversation, is that especially as parents, we're being pulled in all these different directions. We have our careers that we're trying to manage. We have our relationships, our whether it's with our spouse, our friends, family, kids, and there's no shortage. I use this term a lot. There's no shortage of personal and financial priorities pulling at us. But I think what a lot of us struggle with, when I say a lot, I'm kind of really referring, well, to anybody for that matter, but especially parents, that we can't, I don't know if it's we can't or we don't allow ourselves the time to really sit back and think about what it is that we're really wanting to do and what we are wanting to achieve. And it's so easy to get caught up in the hustle and bustle. Like I said, we're recording this at the end of October, and pretty soon we're going to be in the rat race of the holidays with Thanksgiving and Christmas and all that brings. So I think there's a really important conversation for us to have today about how do we find or create the time, I guess. And if I step back and really ask the question a different way, is it a matter of us creating the time or finding the time, if that makes sense?
It absolutely does, and I'm glad that you framed it that way. We can't create time, right? And so in a very literal kind of physics-based way, there's a finite amount of time. And there's a finite amount of time that we really can shift and change. Most of us have jobs or children or all of these big demands that fill up large, large buckets of our time. So it really is about creating, or rather finding time and taking that time. So one of the things that I like to talk about when I'm working with folks who feel like there's not enough time, which is all humans, right? None of us really feel like we have enough time, and if we had more time, we could do all these great things. I like to start by thinking, okay, why do we wish we had more time? And I know, if anybody hasn't listened to our most recent episode around values, that's a good place to start because I think it's really important to think about why are we trying to find more time? What's so important to us that I wish I had more time to do it? And that might seem really obvious, but sometimes it's not as obvious as we think. There are these big buckets. I want to spend more time with my partner, my friends, my kids. Maybe at the very, very bottom of that list is myself, take care of myself in some ways, feed into my mental health or my physical health. But if we really boil it down, oftentimes there are these deeply held beliefs of the value of our time as opposed to somebody else's time. And that may date way, way back to our childhood or messages we've gotten that we're supposed to be busy, we're supposed to be always producing, we're supposed to be always giving time to other people. And particularly for busy parents and busy people who have big jobs or lots of jobs or lots of things going on, there can be a sense of, do I really deserve that time? Is it really something that I'm allowed to take or try to create extra space in my life? There can be this kind of internal voice of who do you think you are that you get to have extra time. So first and foremost, why do we want that time? What's important about having that time so that we can keep that when it invariably gets really hard to take some of that space? And I will talk about some strategies to do that.
It's interesting to hear you talk about that because I feel like when I'm not moving, I'm not busy, I'm not working on something, like we were just talking about anxiety with the election, I feel like I could feel like anxiety starting to build up in me when I'm not doing anything. And I think back to where one of the things that I still find a lot of enjoyment in watching sports, but when I used to sit down and watch, say, like a football game, like Go Irish, for example, I could just sit and watch the game and do nothing. But now I can't even do that. Like when I'm sitting alone watching a game, whether it's the Notre Dame or the Pats or the Bruins or whomever, like it's really hard for me to just sit there and be engaged in the game without working on my laptop or doing something or working on my phone. It's I think the only time that I'm in that environment when I'm not working is actually when I'm with other people. So sometimes I'll just call my neighbors down the street and say, "Hey, I need a break. Like let's just watch the game together because I know if I'm watching the game with you, I'm not going to be working on my laptop."
Right. There is this myth, and I think we often buy into it, that we are supposed to be producing all the time. We're supposed to be always multitasking or watching the game and working or being with our kids and figuring something out. And we humans are really not built to multitask. We actually don't multitask. We just shift sets very quickly back and forth, and we end up really spinning our wheels, wasting a lot more time, whatever that means, wasting. And really not doing either of the things that we want to be doing. We're not attending to the game or doing whatever we're trying to be doing on our phones or working. So I do really like to think about monotasking. Can I do just the thing that I'm actually doing? And I know in previous podcasts we've briefly touched on that concept of mindfulness, which is a kind of a buzzword. And I know we kind of talk about mindfulness. What does that really mean? Mindfulness doesn't mean that we're meditating or that we're just sitting and contemplating. Mindfulness means that we're doing one thing in the present moment, non-judgmentally, and really focusing on that one thing. And when we bring that one mindful approach to anything, whether it's watching your favorite game, being with our children, sitting with a client, we have so much more presence and we also get to really enjoy that moment. And that can make it easier for us to take some more time when we're focusing in. Let's say we only have 2 hours in a given day to spend with our children. If we're really with our children for those 2 hours, really paying attention to them, down on their level, making eye contact, having a conversation, versus being half on our phones, half with the kids, their half on their devices, whatever it is, that time starts to feel a lot more important, a lot bigger, a lot richer, and a lot deeper. So there are a couple of things that I like to think about when I'm trying to create more space in a schedule. That's one of them. First of all, can you just do what you're doing? Can you really just be in that moment where you're doing that one thing that's so, so important to you? The other thing is we do typically have more time than we think we do. And I know that's very hard to believe or to wrap our heads around when we feel like we're constantly busy and constantly going. So one thing that I often like to do as an exercise with my clients, and I've done this for myself many times, is to take a week or so and really get a baseline of how exactly you are spending your time. And I like to be old school with this. Print out a piece of paper that has a 24 by 7 grid on it. And we're going to track our time every hour for a week. You can do it retrospectively, you can do it ahead of time, just kind of knowing your schedule. But the really the best and the most specific and accurate way to do this is to just have kind of a running tally throughout your week. Okay, woke up at 6 a.m., got the kids ready, had breakfast from 6 to 7. Oh, look, scrolled on my phone from 7 to 8 or 8 to 9. Because we'll find these little pockets, and I don't mean this to say that we have to be filling up every second. But what we get at the end of that week is a real accounting of whatever a typical week might look like. The times that we're working, we'll have large chunks of time blocked out, times that we're with family or friends. And there's almost always a little bit more discretionary time than we think there is. Sometimes it's what we think of as downtime. Sometimes it's what we think of as me time. But really looking at that week-long tally. And then I like to contrast it with what would my ideal week look like? How if I were really deliberate, really choosing my time, if I had all the options, right? Ideal doesn't mean that we're going to have to make it that way. But what does that look like versus how I'm actually living? And sometimes there is a bit of an ouch factor when you hold that side by side and realize, wow, here I am saying I don't have time for anything, but I spent 2 hours on a Saturday just mindlessly scrolling or getting into an online debate in the comments section on my favorite social media platform, right? Where am I spending my energy? And what choices am I making? So I think, we've talked a lot about that concept of agency. And when it comes to time, it can feel like this external force that someone's taking all our time or we don't have enough. But we actually typically have more agency than we think. And then we can start to look and say, okay, I've got this little period of time here. I've got 30 minutes there. I've got 15 minutes there. What if I just turned off my phone and sat or journaled or called that friend or texted the people I care about, right? So it's really a matter of finding those pieces of time and reprioritizing what you want to do with it.
That's really interesting because I've never heard a psychologist talk about tracking their time the way that you just did. I've had Laura Vanderkam on the show multiple times throughout the years, and Laura is a pretty well-known productivity expert, if you will. I don't know if you have heard of Laura or not, but she's really great, and that's her lead into just about everything. Is from a data standpoint, unless you know where you're currently at, your baseline, if you will, it makes it really hard to figure out how much time you do have. And it's really not that, again, there's always this common thread between what I do as an advisor and what you do as a therapist. Is it's no different from a family trying to figure out how to save more or achieve a goal. We have to start with a baseline of spending and where's it going, if you will. Not a budget, because I hate that word, but like, where's your spending going, and just tracking it. And I think sometimes it's easier to do that than it is to take the time and write down where your time is going. Because I think, to what you just said, it feels like we're just giving our time away because there's I've read where we can't necessarily put a monetary price point on our time. I guess we can, like, oh, I bill out at X amount of hundreds of dollars an hour, but it's not. I don't think it's as simple as that, is it?
It's not exactly, although it's not a bad way to think about it. I do sometimes do that in my own head. If I'm saying yes to this thing, what is my hourly rate that I'm not receiving during that time? And is it worth it to me? It very well might be. But sometimes it does help to put a literal or metaphorical value on our time. I think one of the things that's so important with all of this is we are constantly making choices every moment of every day, and that can certainly lead to decision overload or feeling like we're making too many choices. But sometimes we don't notice these little minute choices that we make throughout the day, and every time we say yes to something, we are saying no to something else.
Right.
It really is that simple. So if a friend asks me to help them with something this weekend, my instinct might be, of course, yes, I want to help. I care about you. I want to be there and be supportive. And I might not think in that moment, okay, what does that mean I'm not going to be able to do this weekend? I think it's important to be able to really pull back. And I know we've talked about this concept, kind of pulling back from the thoughts and looking at them rather than just having a reaction and a really quick, yes or no. But okay, why am I going to do this thing? What am I saying yes to? What else am I not able to do with that time? Because when we're really thinking about yeses and nos, we're thinking about our boundaries. And our time is one of the most important things for us to have boundaries around. People won't respect them if we don't set them. And even if we do set them, we may have to continually reset them, particularly if you have children, a partner, friends, an employer. People are going to want more and more of your time, which is wonderful. And it does become our responsibility then to decide where we spend that time. If we think of it like a financial accounting, at the end of the weekend, if I turn around and say, am I pleased with how I spent that time? Did I do the things that were meaningful? Did I do the things that were in line with my values? And that's not to say that we always have to be every moment. I think it's okay to have downtime. I think it's actually really, really important to rest. And that might be one of our values, actually taking care of ourselves. So it does become a decision point. And if you feel like you can't say no to people, you probably also feel backed into a corner sometimes. And I think that's one of the main challenges that I work with folks on is most of us are very kind, giving, loving people. We want to say yes. We want to help. We want to be on the PTA. We want to be on the boards. We want to go to all the meetings, right? And that feels good and it feeds a part of us. And sometimes if we don't give ourselves that space to say, okay, have I given enough? Have I given too much? Is there time that I really need for me or for these other priorities? It can lead to feeling very resentful. It can lead to feeling overwhelmed. And as many of us have seen, it can lead to our bodies taking over and saying, you're going to rest whether you want to or not. You're going to catch a cold. You're going to need, you're going to need some downtime. You're going to miss a couple days of work. So I like to say, if you know that you need space or rest, why don't you choose that time rather than your body deciding for you?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and one personally I've been trying to pay more attention to is like listening to my body. And you know, it, I think the point that you made is well taken, because sooner or later your body will tell you like, well, you don't have a choice anymore. I'm going to shut you down, whether that's a sickness or potential like depression or anxiety, that you could probably talk obviously more in depth than anyone. But that's concerning when you get to that point of your body forcing you to shut down. Is that how can you pivot from that? Like, how can you make yourself realize that, okay, I've got to start making some lifestyle changes here?
Hmm. I think this is where other people can be really helpful. Most of us probably have someone in our life who we think does a really good job with this, whether it's a family member or a good friend or perhaps our partner. And I do think it's important to just look around us and see how do other people do this? How do other people make space or time? How do I watch other people saying no to things? Because what we're typically wrestling with is not others' expectations of us so much as our own.
It's our own, yeah.
Right? And we can place these very, very high expectations more than we would ever place on anybody else. If I invite someone to do something and they say, "Oh, I'm really taking this weekend to spend with my family," there's no part of me that says, "Well, that's a terrible idea," or "How could they do that? How dare they?" But I might talk to myself that way. And so noticing, again, pulling back from some of those thoughts that we have that say, who do you think you are to take this time? Or, how come you get to take this? And, is that fair? Is that justified? Is that a good use of your time? And really examine those messages. Whose voice is that? Where's that coming from? How old is that? Many of us heard those messages for decades, and so this is very old messaging that's not necessarily accurate for today, and it may not match up with other people's expectations of us. We typically hold ourselves to a much higher standard than other people do, and a much higher standard than we hold others to. So I guess what I'm talking about is some compassion, some real in the moment compassion. Wow, you know what? I'm just a human and I have a lot of things that I have to do, and the world will not end if I let go of one or two of these pieces, as long as it's in line with my values and as long as I know that I'm deliberately taking that space. It really is okay. And sometimes we have to give ourselves permission for that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because it comes back to that previous conversation we had on purpose and values, and it really starts with that, and knowing, okay, this is what I really want to do, this is what I really believe in, this is what I want to focus on. Then how can I take that and create objectives around it, and then tactics or action items to really achieve that. So if we come back to what you were talking about just a few minutes ago, one of the action items that you gave was to really like write down like where your time is going. Are there other like action items that we can take to create more awareness around our time that you work with people? Or again, just be cognitive of not only how much time we're spending somewhere, but what we're spending that time on, and how do we catch ourselves like finding that, oh, well, wait a minute, this isn't aligned to, what my purpose is.
Hmm. So I'm a big fan of tracking things, and it doesn't have to be really complicated. You don't have to have a special journal or a special app, although certainly there are those things and you can use those. I like to track things in a couple of ways, and just very easy ways to do this. My favorite is what I call the pride practice, and I don't know if there's a different name out there for it, but it's what I started calling it, where at the end of the day, rather than doing a big long journaling session or even a gratitude journal, which are all wonderful approaches, what I found for me is that I needed a minute to just look back on my day and feel proud of some things, to be able to pat myself on the back for making some of these hard choices or values driven choices. So what I like to do and what I often recommend for my clients is to take just a couple minutes at the end of the day and write down 3 things I'm proud of myself for today. And there are a couple of reasons why that is helpful. A, you get to celebrate it. You get to say, oh, wow, I really did create some time or space for myself, or I really did prioritize what I said I was going to, or I really connected with that client today. The other thing it does is if I know I'm going to be doing that every night, throughout the next day, I'm consciously and unconsciously looking for those moments. Oh, I'm proud of myself for that. Or, oh, I just created a little bit of extra room. Or, oh, wow, I said no to that thing that I really knew in my gut I didn't need or want to do. So it keeps us scanning for that, and it keeps that question live in our minds and in our thoughts. So having something like that, or you could do it in the morning, I like to really frame it in the positive. Well, how did I show up for myself? Or if your goal is to take more time, maybe writing down at the end of the day, what are 3 ways today that I took some time for myself? Or what are 3 ways today that I created space for the valued activities that I really wanted to be doing? So really noticing that, because what we pay attention to, we get more of, typically. And I think of our attention as like a lighthouse beam. And if we're only focusing in on the overwhelm, the 10,000 things on our to-do list that we aren't getting done, that is going to be what we think about, and we'll walk around feeling like we're less than, we haven't accomplished enough. So it's important to expand that lighthouse, to be able to see all the realities, look at all the places we are doing this, we are taking care of ourselves. When we appreciate that, we're going to lean into that more and see that we can do that more and more.
I love that. I love that lighthouse analogy. That is really cool. I think when I was listening to you talk about that, I was immediately went to my kids because it's easy to tell my kids how proud of I am of them, but it's a lot harder to say that same thing of myself. And if Teresa's listening to this, probably the same thing towards her as well. So that was a thought that kind of came into my mind, like when you were talking about that, about, and I think it goes back to what you were saying. It's like we're harder on ourselves, or we have these high expectations, and it's oftentimes really hard to achieve those.
It is. It is. And the other thing that I've started doing for my children, for myself, and recommend to my clients is I like to keep what I call a could-do list rather than a to-do list. Certainly we all have those. We also all have those things that we wish we could do if we had more time. You know, oh, if I just had a rainy Saturday with none of the kids around, they're all in activities, I wish I could whatever, right? I wish I could learn the bass. I wish I could pick up a new language. I wish I could reconnect with that friend from high school. Write it down and keep that list not as a to-do list that has to be checked off like a list of tasks, but as a reminder that you have all of these things that will feed you, that you would love to do. And I like to keep that around. It's very helpful for parents to have one that they create with their children as well, for those moments when you do find, oh my gosh, I have 15 extra minutes, or that play date fell through, or oh, look, I've created some time. What is it that I said I wanted to do? Because it's so easy to work really hard, create all that time, and then sit and not do any of those things, right? Sit and just scroll on your phone or get engaged with something that's not a valued activity. So it's helpful to have some reminders that come from you of things that you wish you could do. And
Jen, do you find that with clients that do this, that actually helps reduce their anxiety level? Because again, listening to you say that and knowing a few parents the way that I do, they're always caught up in that to do, and like listening to you talk about creating the kind of like the opposite of a could do, I would think that could help reduce somebody's anxiety around that.
I often find that it does. Yeah. I think we have to approach it in exactly that way of it's not a list that needs to be done. It's more, I think of it almost like those rewards. What are those fun things or those things that I might not think of except when I'm so busy that I can't do anything else? Like, oh, I just wish I could. I mean, this is, revealing what's fun for me. I wish I could go through it and reorganize my closet, right? Those things that could be a to-do list, or it could be like, that would be really enjoyable, right? So just having that, I do find that it reduces anxiety because it also gives us back a little of that personal power, a little of that agency, and it reminds us that our time is ours to decide what we do with. It's decisions. And when I'm often for myself personally thinking about how do I want to spend this time, I think back to times when I have been, what I thought of as too busy or too overwhelmed, times when I was in a really, really big job that was demanding a lot of my time. And I often ask myself the question, sometimes literally out loud, what are the things I said I would do when I had time? Right? What are the things I said I would do if only, right? If only I had more time, if only I had more space. Well, guess what? Now I have it. So what are those things? And it does help to reduce anxiety when we actually do those things as well, because we're showing up for ourselves. We're showing ourselves that we want to master something in our lives, or that we're willing to place our values in the forefront and walk toward them. And sometimes that's hard to do, but it gives us back a whole lot of choice power. And when we feel overwhelmed, it's typically because we feel like we don't have choices.
I was, it kind of reminds me of the demographics of people that I work with. So we're roughly the same age. I'm in my late 40s. I won't say yours, but and I work with, you know, people of age of my parents, and I look back, or I'm looking through their lens and my lens as well, where it's hard to remember what the times were like before we had kids, and in talking to some of these parents or now grandparents, what they wouldn't give to go back and relive some of those moments, because they realize maybe how much they missed out on by struggling with the anxiety of trying to keep up with everything and not being more present in the moment, and really spending their time wisely, if you will.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it really does come back to that idea of our attentional awareness. It's not a bad idea every once in a while to take an electronics break, to take a social media break. I've done that before in my life where I was off of social media for a chunk of time. And, it's
I can't
interesting to
wait to
look.
quit full time, except for LinkedIn. I do love LinkedIn, but like the others, I'm this close to being like, okay, I'm done. I'm shutting all the accounts down.
Hmm. It's an interesting thing to kind of almost do like a social media diet for a period of time and just see what happens. Because what often people notice is we're spending a whole lot more time on it than we realize we are. It
Yeah.
becomes this knee-jerk thing. First thing in the morning, you're looking at your phone, or you're checking your likes, or you're checking your comments, or did I get more followers? But the other thing is, in terms of that attentional awareness that you were just talking about, when I've taken time away from social media, I recognized that a lot of my time was spent thinking of things to put on social media, or being at something
It's
special and
interesting.
taking pictures of it so I could put it on social media, right? And so I'm not really there. And it really does help to recalibrate, ask yourself the question, would I do this thing if nobody knew I was doing it? Right? Would I say yes to this weekend invitation, or would I say yes to this thing if I couldn't share it online, if I couldn't post it? And if the answer is no, which it often is, then why are we doing it? Right? Are we doing it because it feeds our soul? Right? Or are we doing it because we want to, because it's important to us, because it
Feeds our
feeds into
ego.
security, right? Because it feeds our ego. And that can be an interesting way of deciding, how important is this thing to me? If I had to do it and no one would know, would I still want to do this?
Yeah, that's it's that comment really struck, that last one, because I've often wondered, with the podcast. I've been doing the podcast now for 4 years, and it's reached a lot of people, but it's not like gone viral or anything like that. But I love having these conversations with you and others, and I get so much out of it, and I know other people do as well. Um, but it's it's more about the content and helping than it is gaining like a mass following, if you will. knowing that like these conversations and we were exchanging emails back and forth this week on what topic we were going to talk about. And that was the most rewarding email I had gotten like all week was you commenting or telling me like, hey, a lot of people have reached out to tell me like how great these conversations have been and how much we enjoy them, how much we get out of them. And when you hear things like that, it makes it much easier to keep things going because at least you're reaching who you need to reach rather than the masses, if you will.
Exactly. And you're pinpointing another reason why I like that pride practice that we talked about a few minutes ago, because that might be something that I would write or that you would write at the end of the day. I'm really proud that I'm hosting these podcast interviews that are helping some people. Right? And interesting to note, what is the pride point? It's not I'm proud of increasing my viewership or I'm proud of, creating new pipelines. I'm proud of the conversation. I'm proud of the help. Because that pride practice, being able to really pull back and say, what is it that lit me up today? What made me feel so excited, so proud of myself? That's going to point to those values, right? You have a value of being helpful and influential and having meaningful conversations, which is different than a value of getting more listeners or increasing revenue streams. And that can also help us prioritize, is this moving in the direction of something that's really important to me or not?
Well, I think that is probably an excellent place to put a pin in this conversation. Dr. Jen Dragonette, I really appreciate these conversations and the ones that are going to come after this. So again, reminder to our viewers or listeners, if you will, if you have comments, thoughts on the show, topics you want to have us cover, feel free to reach out to us. You can do that on tammacapital.com. And we listen. I read all the comments up to this point. So good, bad, indifferent. We love your feedback. And Jen, I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Paul. I do too.